I am going to go to, I'm going to go right to the two shot.
Okay.
And we'll take our countdown timer off. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our very first coffee chat of 2020. Today we're very fortunate to have Nelson Dunk with us. Nelson, I've gotten to know Nelson over the last few years, and I have to say he's a storyteller at heart. He's produced commercial and brand videos for some of the biggest brands here in the region and in the province, and probably outside the region too. He's one thing I know about Nelson. He's obsessed with the details of excellent visuals, really compelling narratives, and creating video experiences that are really engaging for people to watch. There's a lot of emotion. They evoke a lot of emotion, and I think with any good video, if you're looking to have somebody take action on something, emotion is a really key part of that. So thanks for joining us, Nelson. It's a pleasure to have you here.
You're too kind, Norm. To butter me up. Thank you for having me on.
I was actually being modest, so. So this is a live stream Ask Me Anything session, and we're really hoping that the audience here will pepper Nelson with questions. It's an Ask Me Anything, although I think probably, Nelson, correct me if I'm wrong, keeping it to the video production world is probably good. I don't know, are you a chef as well?
I am not. I enjoy barbecuing. I love, letting something cook low and slow all day, but that's about it. But I mean, that said, I'm an open book. So if you want to talk about anything, then that's fine.
That's awesome. Good. I'll occasionally look over at the computer screen because this is where people's comments and questions will pop up, and we'll just read through as we go and put them on screen. Nelson, I mean, it's hard not to talk about, we don't need to go into a huge amount of detail of the situation everybody is in right now.
Yeah.
As a creative professional, how has this affected you?
Well, I mean, it's tricky. Obviously, with the social distancing, everything is shut down, right? Like we're not doing any shooting. So, I got to exercise that a little bit with this. So thank you for that. I'm in my basement, but I was like, you know what? I'm gonna just go all out and pull all the gear out and see how good we can make it look. But we are shifting gears a fair bit. I know that there's things you can still do as a creative professional, and it depends on what you're doing. If you're in web development or something else where you don't necessarily need to gather assets, then you can continue to work. But as we are content creators, photographers, video people, even to some degree, some people that do things like podcasts and stuff like that, it can be really challenging. So we've shifted gears. We've talked to our clients about using existing assets that we've already collected and already gathered. A lot of people are really keen on doing that. It's pretty budget friendly to do it that way as well. So that's an advantage in this time as well. Things like motion design, animation, there's things that you can do in that space if that brands still need to get their message across, and they still need to reach out to their potential buyers. So that's something that we've been talking with our clients about. How can we do this without necessarily, being sensitive to where we're at? We don't want to get big crews out on and doing things like that. We've had some clients where we've been able to go out and do some drone work and stuff like that, where you're still, you're not close to anybody, so we can do that kind of work. So it is tricky. I won't. I can't complain. You've got people that are working in the grocery stores and, hospitals and places where they're continuing to work, and it's a constant challenge. So I'm really thankful for those people. I'm not going to complain about our situation, but yeah, we're just managing it and helping our clients figure out how they can still communicate their message while, still keeping that distance.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. I think a lot of people are affected by this situation in a lot of different ways, and we just have to cope and do the
Yeah,
best we can through it. And I know for myself, this is a time it's a great time to learn new things, to try new
absolutely.
things. and experiment a little bit. And yeah. I just got a note. Thank you, everybody, for the comments so far. I apologize for looking to the side. I'm just reading them. Isaac says that you sound great, Nelson. There's a bit of echo for me, so I have
Oh,
a feeling that's just related to the fact I'm on Skype and live streaming as well. I hope it's not too distracting. I will fix this for the next one. I think. Thanks for the heads up, Isaac. So no questions so far in the live stream. But Nelson, as my background in the sort of visual world was photography, and I was always a little bit challenged or daunted by the move into video. How did you get into this? Like, how did you find this as your passion? And I mean, it's a substantial investment to do this, both from the time and the finance side of it. What about this made you want to do this?
well, I found I started my early career when I was in university. I was doing some work with a not-for-profit, just in sort of a general communications role, and this was 2005, 2006, somewhere in there, and so it was a lot of, still mailing out newsletters and things like that. Even email marketing wasn't really, very popular at that point. And so, I did things like write copy for the newsletter, help develop the first website, stuff like that. But when we started delving a little bit into video and we were interested in that, that's where I really found, from a storytelling perspective, I was engaged. You can write, and for me, I found I'm not writing is not my my most favorite thing to do. And so to write the stories of impact that we were having, versus going and capturing footage of that and the stories of that, I found it, for me, very compelling to do that from a visual perspective. So, I was thankful that I had an opportunity to learn on the job, as it were. And, I guess I would have been 20 or so at that point. And yeah, just learning how to tell stories through video. I mean, it was right around the time that things were starting to shift for video as well, moving away from sort of the big cameras, moving into memory card storage for video as opposed to tape and that kind of a thing. Which all of those incremental things were progressively easier. Software was coming down in price, so it was really a good time to get into it. You didn't need the big edit bays; you could start to edit on laptops and stuff like that. So that I came into it at a really good convergence of technology as well as my experience. But really, yeah, it was just that medium telling stories to me. I was immediately captured by the emotion that you could tell. And the stories you could tell that way, and that's just sort of been a love affair ever since. Like I love telling stories through video, and I know that for our clients, we've had some opportunities that some people would sort of turn their nose up at, that in terms of content that they think, that's not the most exciting thing, or that's, they're looking to do the big budget commercials and things like that. And I've talked to people in my industry that are like that. And I think, any way that we can help our clients tell their story, no matter what, they have something that's important for them to communicate, and they have an audience that is important for them to hear. So I've always been obsessed with trying to do that in an excellent way, both visually and from a content perspective, helping our clients to run their messaging through that filter of how does this translate to the screen, how does this translate to video, and I can do that pretty quickly and easily at this point. Most meetings, we sit down and we look over copy, we look over brochures even sometimes, and it's like, okay, this is how we can translate this into a narrative that works well for video. It's a totally different medium than everything else, so I enjoy doing that and having that opportunity, and I'm just obsessed with stories. I just love doing it.
Yeah, that's awesome storytelling. Looks like we have a couple of questions from the online audience. I'll just pop them up here on screen. David asks, with the current situation, many businesses are turning online and using video. Technical aspects aside, how would you recommend someone approaching this from a storytelling standpoint? That's a great question, David. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Dave. Nice to see you tuning in. Dave with the SBCN, Small Business Community Network. wonderful folks over there. It's a great question. The techno, and this is true in the current climate that we're in, but just in general, I never am I'm not really a believer in the fact that the equipment and the technology should dictate what you do. I've been fortunate over the number of years to collect equipment that I can do a lot with, and I don't ever want to say to a client that we can't do something just to a technical limitation. That said, especially nowadays, because of video marketing platforms, the accessibility of YouTube, Instagram Stories, IGTV, LinkedIn Video, all of these things, I think that there's an opportunity for brands of all sizes to engage and create video. So yes, you obviously need cameras and microphones. But to me, the most important thing when it comes to storytelling and narrative is creating that arc. And so there's a few different ways to do that. The simplest way that I approach with many clients is sort of the 3-act structure that they teach in storytelling. So you have to think of taking your audience through a journey, and who is the hero of the story. In many cases, the hero of your story, it might be your brand, it might be your product, it might be the customer. And so to kind of bring your audience through that and start with a setup that teases and introduces. The middle one is the one that a lot of people shy away from, and that's the conflict. You have to create some kind of a conflict within your narrative that engages people to continue to watch. And so that may be you ran into a problem running your business. You ran into a technical hurdle. You ran into, a personal challenge, something along those lines that just kind of creates that we need a solution. We need help. We need someone to solve this problem. And then the third act is the resolution of that. What I find particularly with brands is they jump right to that third act and they just want to talk about the features and benefits of what they do. But what you haven't done is created a narrative and a story. And as human beings, we're hardwired for a narrative. And from a video perspective, the roots of video is film, and it's always been storytelling from film. It started from those first films, 100 and plus years ago. So we have to think in terms of a story and in terms of a narrative. And the simplest way is those 3 acts. Start with a bit of an introduction. Conflict is a huge part of that, and then bring that to a resolution, and don't just jump right to that third act.
That's awesome. You talked a little bit about bringing out that narrative and the sort of story arc. Are there resources people can look at that would be helpful for them to kind of understand some of those different kinds of story arcs and narratives? Are there things you'd recommend for people to research and look at?
Yeah, it's not terribly complicated, and I can't think of a specific website that narrows it down, but it's pretty common. It's not a new thing, right, in terms of not only filmmaking, but writing stories. There's multiple act structures, and typically when we're talking about video in this day and age, we're talking about online video, and so shorter is typically better. So that's why I'm typically breaking it down in 3 acts. We did just recently do a longer series where you couldn't do it in 3 acts. They were about 10 to 12-minute episodes for a web series, and so that had to be in a multiple act structure. But when we're talking about branded content, it's typically going to be fairly short. Even when I'm talking about, if we do something like case studies for clients, I lean really heavily into that conflict and like what was the problem. So the three acts is a good place to start from a storytelling perspective. But there are you can just look up story structure, Google that, and there's 5-act structures, there's 7-act structures, there's all sorts. But sort of the simplest way to look at it is set up conflict resolution.
What are some of your favorite films? You mentioned films from 100 years ago. Do you have a few favorites you love from that perspective?
Oh, I have lots. I find it's a never-ending battle too, because I'm relatively young, and so there's all these movies that came out before I was born that I'm trying to catch up on, and there's new movies coming out. Yeah, I don't know. I have I'm a big fan of quirky films. I love Wes Anderson's films. I love the Christopher Guest mockumentaries. I like old films. One of my favorite films of all time is Casablanca. It's just so funny and well written, and there's drama and love, and it's great. Yeah, there's so many great films. I came to The Godfather late in life, and that's such a that's an iconic film. Yeah, there's so many.
Love the Godfather series.
Yeah.
Oh, we've got a couple more questions. one from David Yoon. David asks, DSLR on the road, grabbing customers to film quick accolades. Any tips on getting the best look with a little or no prep, which is run and gun, it sounds, lighting, sound, etc. Next time he'll remember the tripod.
Excellent. That's a great question, and the tripod is key. So yes, remember that. That stabilizing your shot is a big deal in terms of making something look professional. Those who you're not always running with a tripod. We still have mechanical ways to stabilize our shots so that they don't just look handheld and jerky. But to me, the biggest thing is sound in terms of something seeming professional. So many times, even professionals and colleagues of mine get so bogged down in the technical specs of the camera. We're at such a place now where most cameras, I could go out and get a camera from off the shelf from Henry's, and it's going to do a great job if you know how to treat it. So you're going to get good quality, good resolution out of most cameras nowadays. So figuring out a way to get good sound is definitely key, and that could be anything from a little clip-on lav mic if you're doing an interview. It's not the end of the world to see it. I like to hide them, but that gets a little bit trickier because you have to tape it down so you don't hear the clothes. But if you just tape that or clip that on and run that right to your camera, that's a good way to start. You can get some pretty inexpensive shotgun microphones that mount to the top of the camera. Those can be a little bit dicey with people because you're getting more of the ambient noise in the room. If you're doing any kind of an interview, that can get a little bit tricky, but they are easy because you just plug them in and really can move the camera anywhere. And then you don't have a mic to deal with here. So sound is big. The built-in microphones on any camera are garbage. Even, our cinema cameras, we never use the built-in microphones because they're always terrible. So yeah, some kind of external mic, and there's some pretty cheap options nowadays that have pretty decent quality. And then in terms of lighting, if you don't have lights to set up, then you want to think about the quality of the light. So if you're in, say, an office environment and you have fluorescent lights overhead and they're just coming right down, that's not a good look. It tends to create a lot of raccoon eyes, shadows under the eyes and weird shadows under the chin. And also fluorescent lights tend to have a weird green cast to them, so skin tones don't look very good. So if you can avoid that, that's great. Natural light is always good. Sunlight is the best. Always makes skin tone look nice. And if you can avoid direct sunlight, that's going to be even better. So if you're inside and you're sort of close to a window with the light sort of bouncing in as opposed to direct sunlight coming in, it's going to look pretty good. That's just going to have a nice soft look to it for the most part. If you're outside, you could always just be in the shadow of a tree or a building. That's naturally just going to soften all the light. I used to do that all the time when I was working in my early days of that not-for-profit. We didn't have any lights, so I would just go under a tree or in the shadow of a building and just you get rid of all the harsh shadows of the sun. If it's an overcast day, you're great because those clouds are naturally diffusing all the sunlight. Just hop outside. If it's a half decent in terms of quiet environment, then that's a good place to be. But yeah, just try to pay attention to how the light is hitting your subject. If it's really harsh, try to find a place where the light isn't hitting them directly. And trying to not to be directly overhead. Sometimes that's even as simple as if you are in an office environment, if you just move ahead a foot, then if you have like a light over top of them, then it's behind them all of a sudden, and now they're not getting hit with that direct light. So you have to kind of just pay attention to where the light's coming from and the quality of that light. If it can be bouncing off of something as opposed to hitting that person directly, and definitely not kind of coming right at them, either right off the top or even right in their face too.
Right.
Hopefully that answers your question, David.
It's a great question. Thanks, David. What about prepping your talent?
Great
you've
question.
got the technical side all set up. How? Not everybody is a natural presenter. How can you work with your talent to get the best from them?
That's an excellent question. And if we're talking about, I'm assuming we're talking about interview style, as opposed to acting talent. Then there's a couple things you can do. Interview skills are a bit of a learned skill. You have to read your person pretty quickly to figure out, is this the kind of person that I'm going to have to get them to speak shorter? They're just going to keep going and going, and then that makes it a challenge in editing as well. And some people, you need to figure out how to get them to answer the question in a more full way. An easy trick is to remind them that when you ask a question, to try to include the answer. To include the question in the answer. So as an example, if I say, so what's your name, Norm? you would say, "My name is Norm." That wasn't a
Oh,
trick
you wanted
question.
me to answer. Yeah.
Yeah. So instead of just saying Norm, you'd
Norm.
say, "My
Yeah.
name is Norm." That's kind of an easy way for you to help yourself in editing. The other thing too that I find is as simple as just starting off the conversation with them even before the camera starts to roll. So if you, even as you're setting up, you're just sort of asking them, how's your day going today? How was, whatever. That can kind of just get them warmed up and used to you. If you can talk to them on the phone ahead of time, that's even better, because then you have a bit of a rapport with them. Sometimes that's not possible. So I almost always will, while we're setting up, just sort of chat about the weather, the traffic, whatever, just to kind of build that rapport kind of quickly, so that when the camera starts to roll, it's not like it's the first word you've said to this person. That's ideal. The other thing too is just, again, to read, and sometimes you have to just redirect, ask a question a different way, but try to make it seem natural. The biggest one of the biggest things I've seen as well with people that are running interviews that are not used to it is they'll just stick to the questions on the paper that they've come with. And you need to be able to pivot, and you need to be able to jump off of their answer in a conversational way, even though they're not going to hear you in the video. But if you say something to me and I find that interesting, I might say, "Oh, that's really interesting. Tell me a bit more about that." And that may not be on my sheet, but that might just get them talking a bit more. Sometimes I'll even just leave a little bit of space. So if someone gives an answer, I might not ask another question. I might make a statement and then let them fill in the gaps. So if someone says something to me and I might say, "Oh, that sounds really tough," and they'll be like, "Yeah, it was really tough because blah, 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 blah." And so again, it kind of reminds them that it's not an interview, and it makes it feel more like you're having a conversation.
Right. Now, those are really great tips. You need to build up that rapport a little bit, and
Yeah.
asking those guys. And I think maybe when you're asking those follow-up questions, the conversation, you might uncover answers that were actually better than the answer you got the first time.
100%. In that web series I was alluding to before, it was interviews, and they were quite long because it wasn't corporate. They were more it was diving into people's stories, and there was things that came out in that conversation. And I did pre-interviews with all these people that they never talked about, just because we had that rapport, we had that pre-interview conversation, but then they felt comfortable in the moment to just be like, "Oh, and then this thing happened in my life," and I'm sitting there thinking, "Why did you tell me this before? This is an integral part of your story." But it just, because we're having a conversation, we're just chatting, and they felt comfortable that it kind of just came out.
Yeah. You alluded to that web series. I have a clip of that I'd like to play for everybody because it's an amazing production. You can tell us a little bit more after I play the clip, but yeah, let's just go to that and have a look at some of that.
While my mom was making dinner, I was up there with her, like cutting onions and chopping celery.
We were living paycheck to paycheck. There was no plan B.
When you're tasting coffee, take a good scoop with your spoon.
I think I just like when I'm pushed outside my limits.
Wow, those are some pretty powerful visuals. Tell us a little bit about how this came about. That's really interesting.
Well, I was really inspired by people, particularly in our community, and these are all folks from Waterloo region. And I was really inspired by people who are actively trying to keep their business small. They're so obsessed with doing something well, and they themselves doing it, that they are creating stuff that is interesting and unique, and even sort of using old techniques and stuff like that. But they're not trying to scale. They're just content doing what they do, and I've just found that so interesting in this culture of makers and artisans, and so I pitched the idea to Bell Media, and they loved it. And so we have 6 episodes that are coming exclusively to Bell customers in a couple weeks, and then there'll be a wide release after that. But yeah, it was such a amazing experience to just sit down with these folks and talk to them about not only what they do and how they do it, and that's a big part of the show, but there's also, you know, the personal struggles and what it's like running a small business that might just be them, you know, or one other person, and what that's like. Particularly, you know, now I think it's very, very poignant. You know, I follow all these folks still, and you know, it can be tough, you know, running a very, very small business, especially in that space. Yeah, I'm hopefully everyone will check it out. We'll post links when it's available. But yeah, it was a great time.
Well, it looks amazing. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
It looks fantastic. I have a few more questions up here. Just pop up one here. Morley is asking, was wondering what a good camera for someone just starting out and wants to shoot professional, but also wants to invest in something that they don't have to replace in a year. So I guess finding that balance between affordability and something that's going to last you for a while. That's a great question, Morley. Thanks for asking. What do you think, Nelson?
That's an excellent question. Like most things when it comes to gear, it depends on what you're filming. You have to think a bit about your workflow. You have to think about the sort of the end to end from capture all the way to delivery. And that's something that I've learned the hard way, where, you know, you buy a new piece of gear, we buy a new camera, and then all of a sudden, our computers can't keep up with that. So now we're investing in computers, and the hard drive space, it takes so much more space so we have to invest in more hard drive. So you have to think about that as well. But as someone who's starting out, the beauty of where you're at is, there are a ton of options, and most of them are great. So I don't know if I can give you a specific model or a specific brand. That's very much to taste. You know, I'm a big fan of, I like Canon. I'm a big fan of the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema cameras. They're great for what they are. But I know folks that are super Sony people, super Fuji people, and it really, really depends. Now, in terms of replacing your camera in a year, part of that too, and I'm not sure, Morley, if you are in video production, so I'll speak from that perspective. If you're starting out, it's important to not get too caught up in the gear game, because what's more important is that you're creating engaging content, and you can do that with, like I said, the lowest end camera you can pick up at a photography store. So you want to look for those features that are important to you. You want to think about the fact that, you know, if you're shooting something that's raw, do I have the hard drive space to handle that? Am I doing a lot of work? Will my computer handle it? I don't necessarily have the budget to upgrade everything. So there's those conversations that you want to have, but also recognizing the fact that you know, you don't necessarily need a camera that shoots 8K or even 6K necessarily. Sometimes you're delivering at 1080p, and so you know, even a camera that shoots 4K, which I think most of them do now, would be great. So it's a little tricky. One thing I would say is consider renting a few. You know, once sort of shops are opened up again, and trying them out and paying attention to usability, paying attention to the look. Because, you know, I've gone through a few cameras over the years chasing down a look that I liked. Would have been better just to rent them and figure out whether or not I like the look, as opposed to buying a camera and realizing this doesn't look the way I want it to. Because that's very much a personal taste thing. I'm not a big fan of the Sony look. Some people are all about it. Sorry, Norm. Norm's one of those guys that's all about it. So again, yeah, I think you just have to kind of figure out what's the look you like. End to end, can you handle the footage that's coming off in terms of the size and the codec and all of that, and then usability too. You know, if you are getting something that's, you know, on the lower end, do you have the ability to plug microphones in if you don't have an external recorder? How big is your crew? If you're a one person band, then yeah, you don't want something where you have all these other bits and pieces where you're trying to set up quickly. So just kind of, it's again, it's a little tricky to give a recommendation on one thing. But just thinking about, yeah, your workflow, thinking about how you shoot, the capabilities you need. The specs are almost the least important thing, because at this point, pretty much everything is great.
Yeah, I like. I had a chance to. I actually used one of your Blackmagic Pocket Cinema cameras, the new 6K, and I felt that was a really good balance between like affordability and the quality of the image. You know, the flexibility it gave you with the inputs and the navigation. I thought it was a nice balance. And you're right, there's so much out there right now that's great. It's really a matter of, does it suit your need? Is it a good investment? When I was doing still photography, someone once told me, and this was really good advice, they said, camera bodies change all the time, but lenses are for life.
100%.
And I think if you make a good investment in high quality lenses, which can lock you into a certain type of camera, at least in the still photography world it did, you know, it's the lens that forms the image most of the time. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I've seen footage come off of cameras that are on the lower end of the scale, and because they had attached, you know, and I'm not saying morally you need to run it and get a $10,000 cinema lens, but you attach that lens to a camera body that is a decent body, and the footage on it just looks amazing. So that is definitely a big difference. If it were me, I agree. I would put budget more towards getting some high quality glass. Right. And then because crappy glass on an excellent camera, you're going to have a terrible image. So the camera, it is important. But I agree, Norm, that the glass is way different. That's sort of, as I've, expanded, I've got the cameras I love. I've got decent lighting kit. Now I'm into, what are the different looks the lenses can give you. I've just picked up a set of vintage Canon FD lenses from the 70s that I'm playing around with, and I love the look. Actually, I shot all of Handmade on them, and I just love the way they came out, because that affects your image as well. So it's like every step along the way affects what you're doing.
Awesome. We have another question we'll get to from Ryan. I'll just bring it up on the screen here. Ryan's asking, can you speak to the lengths of various videos that various videos should be, and how this has changed over time? Great question. People's attention spans, right?
Yeah.
As an explainer video, or say a video asset, including in a sales email. So an excellent question. What do you think about the length of videos and related to people's ability to pay attention?
That's, again, an excellent question, and one I get asked all the time. And the way that I approach length of video has to do partially with the style of the video, like you mentioned, explainer videos and email marketing and things like that. But you also have to think about, from a brand perspective, where in the buyer's journey that video is trying to grab someone. And so you may have videos that are varying lengths, because you're trying to grab people at different places along their buyer's journey. So as an example, and typically those are getting longer as someone gets closer to buying, because you're thinking about the perspective of your audience. If it's an awareness piece where they aren't aware of you at all, or aware of your product or your brand at all, then that's something that needs to be fairly high level, short, quick. You get to the point really quickly. And you want to try and grab them in so that they want to learn more. So that is one where you're going to be, it could be as short as 15 seconds or 30 seconds. The platform also has to do with that as well. If you're going to be using it for, social media, you need to be fairly short. If it's going to be for, say, a YouTube pre-roll, sometimes people are making those pre-rolls that are 5 seconds long because, you don't want people to skip them. So, that's part of the conversation as well, as where's the video going to live. And if you have that kind of a piece, if you get down to an explainer video, if we're talking about explaining a product or how a product works, those can be fairly long, because at that point, you're getting into a place where someone is engaged enough with your brand that they want to know that level of detail, and so they'll watch that all the way through. And that's the biggest question, is like, how are we keeping people engaged, through compelling narrative, interesting content, but also if it is too long or gets repetitive, then people will start to tune out. So even in that level, even if you can have an explainer video that needs to be 3 to 5 minutes long, let's say, I would say you're probably not going much beyond that. Then you want to start breaking it up into multiple videos, which does kind of branch into a video marketing strategy conversation around, again, where are these videos living? How are you capturing your audience? If these are going to be living on YouTube, then if you have multiple videos, then you're creating multiple places where you can grab someone. You can optimize each one of those videos for a very specific question, a very specific set of SEO, tags, metadata, stuff like that, whether it's on a landing page or just through YouTube search organically. then that's part of the conversation as well. Is if these are living in that space, then we can start to drive more traffic towards people buying, because we're capturing them on all of these different questions that they have to ask. So that's part of that as well. But then you do have some content on YouTube, and the statistics tend to show that YouTube has a very interesting split. You have the highest levels of engagement are below, I think it's 45 seconds, and above 10 minutes. So in between there, people that are just stumbling across videos are finding that their engagement isn't quite as high. Now, I don't think that's a reason to create a video that's 12 minutes that doesn't need to be 12 minutes. But you will find a lot of YouTube channels. If you look at, regular YouTubers, their videos are going to be 11 minutes, 12 minutes, because that's where people tend to be engaged statistically. But again, to me, I don't think that should drive the content. And it's a strategy conversation. So if you have people that are following your channel already and looking for that next video every week, then yeah, you can probably do that. If it's something where you're trying to gather an audience, I think more content is better than longer content. That's my opinion. So I would do it that way. We work with brands on developing YouTube strategies. We have one now that we just did a series of 30 instructional videos in the construction industry, and each one is answering a different question. And it's been a really, really good strategy for them, because we're capturing people that are asking questions about various parts, whether it's solar panels, whether it's electrical, whether it's drywall, whether it's soundproofing. And so we have all these videos that are optimized for each one of those topics. And so we're getting people from all these different industries or all these different parts of the industry that are working in that space, and optimizing each video for that on the YouTube side. And we're just seeing their subscribers skyrocket because of that. So that's part of the conversation. Now that's online. There's also the conversation about if the audience is captive. Let's say you're doing a video for a live event, or for a sales presentation or something where the person's there. You can almost always get away with something that's a little bit longer. Again, it should be as long as it needs to be. That's kind of my that's my broad strokes answer there. But if you are sitting in a sales meeting, or you're sitting in an event or something like that, then you can probably have something that's a bit longer. We're working on a project for a client that they were going to have their event, which has now been canceled, but it was a history of the organization, and it's a member organization, so everyone there is very involved, very committed to the organization. So we're like, this can be quite long, because they're interested. They want to see, how did this come about? What's been the impact? They're interested in that content. So we were doing a 10-minute, almost mini documentary, because people were going to be sitting in this event and captivated by this organization that they are due paying members of. So yeah, there's a lot of conversation around how long something should be. Sorry, that wasn't a brief answer, but that it like
Doesn't
everything.
have to be brief.
It depends.
We have all day.
Yeah.
Well, maybe. That's an awesome answer. The other thing I was thinking about is just most of the platforms and the tools give you great attention measurement capabilities. So you can see if people are starting to watch and where they're dropping off in the video.
Totally.
So some of those tools, I think, maybe can help people figure out whether their content's the right length or not, or whether they need to make it shorter, or where they need to move the call to action in the video to get to, because you don't want to put it where people have already dropped off, those kinds of things. So I think
Absolutely.
it's a great measurable vehicle as well.
And to me, that's one of the most exciting things about digital platforms now is being able to be sort of iterative with your video, and not, it used to be that you'd make your $200,000 commercial, and that's the piece you're going to use for the next year, and you have no idea whether it's working or whether it resonates with people. But now you can create something and see, you know what, that isn't working as well as we thought it would. People are dropping off here. Maybe there's a problem with engagement, or with all of your metrics. And this is we could have a whole conversation around this, but looking at specifically your YouTube metrics, if you have high impressions and low click through, what does that mean? Is that a thumbnail issue? Is that a titling issue? If you have low impressions, is there a keyword issue or a tags issue? And if it's people are dropping off, but you have a high click through rate, well, maybe misleading them a little bit with the thumbnail and the title, and now they're realizing that you're not delivering what you said you were, and that's a brand issue. So
Clickbait.
yeah, exactly. So there is a lot you can dive into when you start looking at that stuff, which is really exciting for brands to not just for interest's sake, but then say, how do we take what we've learned here and apply that to the next thing, or let's re-edit the one we already have and take the footage that we got and make it into a new version of that addresses some of those issues. And no one's ever been able to do that before, and now we can.
Yeah. Got some more questions here. Peter is asking, just bring this up on screen. Is 8K more of a hindrance than a benefit due to the massive data rates and file sizes? You know, that's interesting because a lot of I see some new cameras that are coming out, emerging, that are, you know, in the prosumer range, and they're all touting 8K. And is it what's the benefit of it? And then what are some of the considerations to using some of these higher resolution cameras?
Yeah, it's a great
question, Peter.
Great question, Peter. And like everything, there's pros and cons. With, you know, we shoot with the red helium, which is 8K, and it is wonderful, beautiful image. Let's start with the pros, particularly with ours, with the red. Although I think Canon just announced an 8K, and there's a few now. But you do have that resolution that allows you, if you're scaling down, you end up with a bit of a sharper image, and you're also scaling down your noise profile and things like that. So you end up with a bit of a cleaner image. So I do like that. I like the ability to reframe in post, although it is a little bit of a lazy trick because it just punching in doesn't have the same effect as putting a longer lens on your camera in terms of how it affects the background, how it affects, you know, if it's a person, it affects their face. So the optics aren't changing, you're just literally punching in, but it is helpful. You know, I have done in the past where it's a bit of a quick setup where we just throw up the red and we know, okay, if it's an interview situation, I can punch in and out and I can cut around this and make it work. I don't know if I would rely on that, but it is definitely helpful. But yeah, you're right. The data rates are crazy. And if you think about deliverables, like we're delivering everything at 4K, but a lot of clients don't need it. So if you're delivering, even if you are delivering at 4K, you know, to have a 4K camera is fantastic. If you're delivering at 1080p, then, you know, 8K is tons and tons of resolution. And then, yeah, like we were saying before with Morley's question, then you have to think about your end-to-end solution. So, you know, when we did get the red, instantly it's like new computers, you know, we've got scads of storage space, and we're buying hard drives all the time, spending thousands of dollars a year on storage space. So that if you have the capacity to deal with that and the budgets with your clients to roll that into the budget, it's not a big deal. It is a hassle. You have to change the way that you work, but there are benefits to it. But is it something where I would say I think people chase resolution far too much. I think that as video production professionals, the resolution is great and useful, but I don't think, you know, if and when there's a 10K and a 12K and a 16K camera come out, I'm not rushing to get it. I'm very happy with the image on mine. You know, if you think about even something like, you know, the Arri Alexa, if you're familiar, as a video production, they only just came out with the 4K version of that camera, and most of the films in Hollywood were still being shot 2K up until very recently. So the resolution, and again, if you think about you know, when you go to the movie theater, those projectors aren't projecting 4K for the most part unless you're at a really, really high end one. So the resolution to me is far less of a conversation than dynamic range is important. Color, the way that deals with the color and skin tones, I would much rather have that conversation than how many Ks something is, the resolution of the sensor. There's much things that are way more important than that. So I tend to agree with you, Peter. I think that it's something that people are constantly chasing after, and it's a good, you know, if you're following the industry, that's a really fun thing to play around with. How high is the resolution going to get? But from a practical perspective, yeah, you've got huge amounts of data that you have to deal with. And then, yeah, you have to have computers that have either great GPUs, CPUs, to be able to deal with that. Thankfully, with the Red, with the wavelet compression, you can scale it back pretty easily. I'm never playing it back off a timeline at 8K. I'm never delivering at 8K either, so that doesn't really matter. But yeah, you have to kind of figure out those workarounds, and it can be a bit of a hassle, especially if you're making a jump from something like a DSLR that's shooting H.264 that your computer just runs and just goes, and you don't have to think about that, and you can store your year's worth of client content on one drive. That's great. Sometimes I wish I could go back to that. It'd be great.
I guess it has a lot of implications, like on backup and storage and archiving and all of that.
Totally.
And
Yeah.
keep all that stuff. So it affects your whole workflow. We talked a little bit about cameras and a little bit about lighting. What about sound for video? How do you deal with sound? How important is it?
It's critical. I would say, going back to the question about resolution. I think I think the audience here is a bit mixed between marketing folks and production folks. That's kind of what I'm getting. So I'll talk to the marketing guys for a second, or sorry, the production guys for a second. As a video production professional, I think it's more important for you to focus on your sound and your lighting techniques than which camera you have. From a sound perspective, yeah, it's critical, especially for client work, but even just if you're doing narrative work or doc work or whatever, that is more obvious to your audience when you have bad sound than if you have a lower resolution camera. So that to me is focus your energy on getting decent mics and learning how to use them. So yeah, again, it all depends on the situation. I'm a big fan of shotgun mics. So, you can kind of have a mic that's over someone's head. You want to kind of get it sort of as close to them as you can without getting into frame. You can also have, like I mentioned before, have lavalier clip-on mics that can be handy in interview situations. Those can get a little bit dicey, again, for clothing noise if you're trying to hide them, or if you're outside and it's windy, then you have to watch out. The wind can really hit those really badly. Yeah, and then again, there's varying levels of quality of microphones and that kind of a thing. I think we're living in a place where, for the most part, you're getting pretty decent results out of a lot of mics. You can obviously upgrade along the way, but if you are starting out, a half decent boom mic that you can get right close to your talent. I'm a big fan of the sound of those, but there are different opinions. Some people really like the lavalier sound. That can be really handy. I don't get too bogged down in wired versus wireless. Again, for the production guys, wireless is nice, but it can be a hassle too. You got to worry about batteries. You got to worry about interfering frequencies depending on where you are. If you're in a big city with lots of cell towers and all that kind of thing, then it can be a hassle. Yeah. So sometimes it's easier just to plug that mic right into the camera. And then, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, Norm.
Oh yeah, that was great. And actually, Peter asked an interesting question, and I'll just bring it up here on screen. To what extent do clients respond better, feel more confident, if you by simply having a more expensive looking gear, which is, an interesting question. I worked my way through university shooting weddings, and I actually loved shooting them. They were a hoot. But I was always competing when you have a camera that your Uncle Dave has. It's like, why doesn't Uncle Dave shoot the wedding? People think it's the camera that makes the image. What are your thoughts on Peter's question?
It's a good point, and I wish I could say, Peter, that it didn't matter, but it actually kind of does. But I will say, the clients typically don't know anything beyond the look of it, so they don't know what's inside of it. They don't know what the resolution is. They don't know that kind of thing. That's our job. So I don't disagree. I don't think you're wrong about that. I think that that does play into it. Now, there are ways, if that's something that you are getting a bit of feedback from a client where it seems like they're sort of like, oh, that's all you have. There's a couple things that I would say you could do. I don't think you necessarily need to run out and get the most expensive camera just for that reason. Definitely not. If there's a few things that I think people tend to respond and think, oh, that's really high end. Have a good tripod, which is good anyway. A good chunky tripod always looks nice. If you want to put, even a cheap cage around your camera, that all of a sudden makes it look bigger. A matte box, you get a cheap matte box, all of a sudden it looks like you're shooting a movie. But the other thing too is the biggest comments I get is when I'm rolling into a shoot and I've got my cart piled high with stands and lights and things, which are not the most expensive part of my kit. And people are always like, oh man, you have so much gear. And they're so impressed with the setup. So again, and I don't do it for that, but I do it because that's what it takes to make it look good. And that's what the client's paying you for. So I would say you're not wrong about that. And I think if you want to get to a level at which you are have clients that are at a certain budget, then they're going to have an expectation. And whether you're a one person band, still rolling in with the equipment that you need to do the job. If you're just popping up a camera on a tripod you got on Amazon, and that's it. One, yeah, it doesn't look that impressive, but also you're not putting craft into your work either. So clients will appreciate when you have a light with some diffusion and a backlight, and you've taken some time to light the background. So that is you offering them value for what they're paying you. At the same time, it also makes it look better. So both things are true. So I would definitely not get hung up on that and think, oh, I've got to have a Red, or I've got to have a big Sony, or I've got to have whatever. I can't have this DSLR because they're going to think I'm not legitimate. They don't care as long as the end product looks good. But I do agree that there is an arrival and you want to make it look like you are professional. But to me, again, when I was starting out, I didn't have really impressive gear. So what I impressed them with was, before I even got to this to set, was when I showed up for a meeting, I was always in a suit, and I still do that. Like I don't show up in a suit to a shoot because that's impractical. But if I'm having a meeting with a client, I show up in a suit and a tie because I'm a professional. And so when I'm talking to them on the phone, I'm treating them as a professional. So again, I don't know where you're at, Peter, in your career. You may be with me, and I feel like I'm talking down to you, and I apologize. But if for anyone that's watching that is in that space, I think that the way that we present ourselves is important, and the camera is not the entire picture of that. But if you do feel like it feels a little bit like I'm getting some sideways glances about what I've brought versus what I'm charging, get yourself a matte box, and instantly that camera's going to look 1,000 times better.
Put a matte box on it.
Put a matte box on it. Looks amazing.
Great question, Peter. Yeah, really interesting one. Like I said, when I shot weddings, I experienced a little bit of that, and all the other wedding photographers that I knew all had big Hasselblad cameras and looked the part. But
it's and not to say that those things aren't, Hasselblad is going to shoot nicer shots than a point and shoot camera. Yeah. So it's just not the whole conversation, right? No. Now, you don't go out and do that in, if you don't have the clients to support that level of production, then you're constantly chasing a look, and you're constantly thinking about how you look to your client versus the work that you're doing. So you get the tools you need to do the job that you want to do, and so that you're happy with, and that your clients are happy with. And that's a progressive thing, right? Like, you don't start off with the highest end cinema camera. You start off with what you can afford and learn how to make that shot look the best. Because the truth is, if you put the best camera in the hands of an amateur, the shot's not going to look good, right? Like you have to learn how to light. You have to learn how to deal with different lighting situations, to walk into a room and say, this window's here, this light is here, this is how I'm going to have to set this up. I got to block that out. I can lean into this because this is the way the window, the light's bouncing in. That is skill that takes time, and that is way more important, way more important than what camera you're shooting on.
Yeah, agreed. Great. Question here from Harm at Default Pics. I'll just bring it up on screen. Do video content strategies for YouTube and Instagram TV need to be drastically different? For example, is it more than just cropping your YouTube content 9 to 16? Oh, that's a great question. In fact, we're just having conversations about vertical square video. I mean, from a production standpoint, it must be a challenge to think about that. What are your thoughts?
That's a really good question, Harm. I think that there are, with everything with video, there are those two parts, and this is what I kind of hear you asking. There's sort of there's the technical side, the specification side. I used to be way more against, vertical video than I am now. I just think I thought it was done really clunky at first, and I wasn't a big fan. But now, particularly because most people are on mobile, when you're scrolling through and I see a video that on Instagram that fills up the whole screen, it's kind of nice. I don't think that is. I think that's part of the conversation in terms of where your audience is, where you are trying to build that following. I don't know about YouTube particularly in terms of vertical video yet, because I still think that a lot of the content is, even though people are watching it on mobile, I still think they're flipping their phones. That's just sort of my gut feeling. So there's that sort of technical side. Is I don't think you're wrong. I think what I would consider in the future, depending on the content, and this is really tough, is trying to think about how you would frame it for both. And again, I don't think that has to happen exclusively. I think that because if you're trying to shoot something and you're thinking, oh, it's got to be 9:16 for Instagram, but then I'm also gonna display it at a trade show and so on, you know what I mean? Like then. How do you shoot? You can't shoot it twice for those two things. So I think you could have the conversation around, having an overlay or something on your screen so that you can try to frame it up so that you could use it for both and just do a reframe in post. You could do it that way. But I think it is a conversation around what's the channel you're trying to build and where's your audience at. I do think that you have to think about that. I don't think that brands can necessarily build all at once. It might be hard to do that. It's such an evolving conversation. I don't know if I have a straight answer for you, but I do think in terms of the structure of the content, absolutely as well, that needs to be tailored to what platform you're on. And I don't know if we have a straight answer on how you do that. If you want to create some video that we want it to be on Instagram, but we also want to build our YouTube channel, but we also have Facebook, and then also it's going to live on our website. Can you create one piece of content that is ideally shot and developed for each of those platforms? I don't know if you can. So, I mean, oftentimes in our case, when we're creating content for clients, it's rare at this point that we ever do one deliverable. It's almost always, we're going to do, let's say, a 90-second for a landing page. But we also have to do a 15-second for YouTube pre-roll. And we're going to do a 45-second for Instagram. And so we're always having that conversation on the front end. Just to try to map out where these things are going to live. And then in editing, for sure, this is our Instagram version. And so this is kind of how we want it to play out. But it is a challenge. I don't know if I have a straight answer for you, and I don't know that we've totally figured that out yet.
It is a really good question.
Yeah. I do think it's interesting that now in IGTV, it's not all vertical. I think it had to be when they first launched it. And I thought that was dumb. Now you can actually flip your phone and watch it the other way, I think. Can you? Maybe I'm wrong about that. But it's a challenge. I don't know if I have a straight answer for you, Harm, but I agree. I think that as content creators and video marketers, we need to have that conversation with our clients to find out, one, where their audience is now, two, if they don't have an audience now, where are we trying to build, and not necessarily try to create one thing that's going to work in all of them. Whether that means we are creating multiple pieces of content that's specifically tailored for each one. And ultimately, I think that's actually where things are going to go, structurally and from a narrative perspective. But then I think also sometimes clients just kind of get in their heads, we have to do everything. And sometimes that isn't actually the best way to do it. Maybe we need to just focus on building your YouTube channel, or maybe we need to focus on building your Instagram following. And that will be sort of that prime way of delivering that content. I think that's ultimately going to be the way things go, but it is ongoing and it's progressing. So we don't really have a straight answer yet.
No, and Peter asked a great follow-up question, I guess, with the proliferation of all those channels. If you're engaging someone like yourselves in that, Peter's question is, do you charge for delivering all those different formats? Or his follow-up question is basically, how do you charge?
Great question. So to answer the first question, yes, because the number of deliverables impacts the amount of time that we're spending. So if you have to edit a video and then re-edit it for a different platform, then yes, there's additional charge for that. It's not like you're paying for 3 unique videos. From my perspective, there may be other production companies that would do that. I would say that I don't think that translates to the amount of time that we're spending. So if an editor has to take, let's say, 30 hours to create, the 90-second cut, it's not going to take them another 30 hours to create a 15-second cut. It might take, 8 or something like that. So I think that the charge should reflect that. But so yes, we do. If there's multiple deliverables and multiple platforms, absolutely, because it reflects the amount of time that needs to be spent on that. So that answers the first question. Second question, again, a bit of a moving target. How you charge, you have to think about how much time is being spent. And for us, our budgets range depending on the biggest things are the amount of time on set and in editing, and then the crew size. That's kind of the biggest things. For the most part, for us, we own all the equipment. I'm not doing a lot of rentals, so that doesn't really affect the budget at all. There's sort of just like a set fee for equipment. So we, and again, it sort of depends. The other thing that would impact is where the video is living, the size of the company, because that would affect your music licensing fees. So those things can come into play as well. You have to do a bit of homework on that to figure out what that charge is going to be, because that needs to be paid by the client as well. And yeah, so more or less for me, it comes down to the amount of time that something is going to take. If we had a project in the summer that we needed to film literally all over the province. It's a client that has sort of regional offices, and they wanted to make sure all were represented. So it was something like 10 days, tons of travel. So the budget on that reflected that, 10 days on the road plus mileage and all of that, that's going to be a different budget than, we have another project in, we have an office in St. Jacobs, and we're doing a project with the tourism for the village of St. Jacobs. And I can literally walk across the street with the camera and get shots. So that's going to be different than, having to drive to Ottawa and spend 2 days shooting. So that's kind of what it looks like. In terms of how you charge, how much your time is worth, that's kind of a personal choice, but you think your time is valued at. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it's pricing is always challenging to do. There's always a cost to things, but there's also the value you're creating by doing this as well that factors into that.
For sure.
Well, those were fantastic questions. We're coming up on 12. Happy to stay on and answer some more questions, Nelson, if you have a little bit more time. But
of course.
I have one more from Harm. Maybe we'll take this as the last question, and then we'll close it off. So Harm is asking, I'll just bring it up on screen. Speaking of costs, how and when does one know it's time to increase the price they charge? When did you first increase what you charge? Whoa. Excellent question.
That is a good question. I tend to increase when we get too busy. So, if we're kind of at a place where sort of to me, there's always been sort of these levels of budgets that clients can handle, and that's totally fair. If you're a small company or not for profit or a startup or something, and you don't have the resources to devote to a large video production, that is 100% fine. And there's companies that can handle that, and whether it's a smaller company or people that are starting out or whatever, they can do a great job for that budget. And so that may be something where we look at it and we say, we can't necessarily work in that budget range. That said, budgets for video in general are coming down. You used to, maybe 20 years ago, you'd pay $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 for one video. That was nowhere near what we can do now, because you had to have equipment and crew and the big edit bays and all of that you just don't need anymore. So I can go with my camera and shoot something that looks way better than what they needed, 6 people to do at that time. So that's also fair enough to clients that those budgets should be coming down. We're saving money. Our software's not as expensive. Our cameras aren't as expensive. That should be passed on to the client. But I think as well, when you get to a level where you're working with clients that are at this level and they're expecting this level of production and end result. And again, when they show up to set, it's nice to have a few people there. Sometimes it's hair and makeup. Sometimes it's, craft services. Maybe you're catering food in. That all has to be taken into consideration. So it sort of depends to me on what level of budget you're attracting. That's kind of where I kind of look at that increase is what are the client expectations, and then when you get to a place where for me along my career, I would get those one-off clients where it's like, oh, this client's got a budget and they really want to go all out. We do that, but that may be one client out of 20, and the rest are not there. So I can't immediately be like, well, I'm raising my rates to this because the rest of you can just drop off the bottom, because then you're going to starve. So it's tricky. You have to kind of see, okay, well, now we're at this level where we've got these clients that are maybe giving us regular business, or I know they're going to come back every year and do this project or do something. And so it's like, I think we feel like we can kind of bump that up a little bit. And you're probably going to lose some of those clients that don't necessarily have that budget, and that's a tricky thing to try to navigate. I agree, Harm. But you have to me, part of it is, one, am I regularly getting work from this level of client? And therefore, I think we can bump that up a little bit and then not necessarily take the work that's down here, because then what I also find is that you get really, really busy because your bar is kind of low. And so you're taking in all this work and you can't necessarily do a good job on anything because you're so busy trying to just get everything out the door. And that's never been my perspective. I know that there are production companies where it's just like more and more and more, let's just do as much work as possible. To me, that's sort of like a factory. I don't love that feeling like I'm a video factory. I prefer to address every project individually, and have the time and effort to put a craft into it and not just worry about getting it out the door so that we can do the next thing. So that's my perspective, which is why I've kept things fairly lean for Skylight, because I want to be able to scale up, scale down, and address the client as we in the project that's in front of us. If you want to grow to be a large video production company, which again, fair enough, that's great if you want to do that, then yeah, you do kind of just need to take everything that comes in the door and just crew up and get as many staff on as possible to be able to handle that. But and that then maybe your rates are a little bit lower because you just need a lot of work to come in the door so that you can keep paying people and keep the lights on. That's also a strategy as well. So I can only speak from my experience, and my perspective is I've never really wanted to be that. I like the craft of the work that we do. I don't want to farm it all out or have to cut back or tell a client, no, sorry, we can't, your video looks like crap because you didn't have the budget for it. I hate that, so I would much rather have the budget where we don't really have to, we can just do whatever they want to do. And we don't really have to worry about churning out stuff, but it does take some time to get there as well, right? Like you have to, but I think part of that is going to be perspective. My perspective has always been do an excellent job, and no matter what I'm working on. So I kind of alluded to this at the beginning, is, and we have clients that are, I'll tell people that what I'm working on, because they always ask, and they'll be like, really, that's what it's about this topic, and I don't care what it's about. I'm still going to do a good job on it, and make it look and sound great and have an engaging narrative. And I think because of that, I've been able to retain clients and also attract attract higher, larger clients, because no matter who the client is or what the project is, I'm putting my 100% into it. And there's been times, we have a project manager that's always like, her number one rule is, don't lose money on a project. And there's sometimes where I'm like, you know what, this project needs X, and we're going to just do it because it's going to make it better. And I know we didn't scope for it, but the client, let's just make it happen. It's going to be a great piece. And she's just like, rolls her eyes. But, that's what you got to do, because you want to do the best work you can for your client. So, sorry, that was a roundabout way, Harm, of answering your question. Hopefully that you got something in there.
Oh, I think that's really good. And it's actually interesting because we played the little trailer for Handmade, which is, I think it's what you're talking about here. It's people who, scaling is fine. If you want to have a big company and scale, I think that's it. And then some people want to keep things small and apply the craftsmanship to it. And I think maybe your appreciation for that and is also maybe one of the reasons why Handmade was such a great project for you. I'm going to wrap this up. Nelson, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us and for sharing all of your experience and insights. That was really amazing. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody who joined the live stream and asked fantastic questions. This is the first one we've done. I really appreciate all the really considerate questions. And I think, Nelson, I hope you and your family stay safe through this period. I hope everybody does. And I think we'll just close out by just rerunning Nelson's trailer for Handmade. Nelson, when do we get to watch this again? And what are the platforms it's going to be on?
I'm actually not sure when it launches. Everything's over with Bell Media now, so we're waiting to hear back on when they get it on their platform. But yeah, the way that they've licensed it is they get exclusivity for any Bell customer, if you're a Bell Mobile or Bell TV, they have a platform called TV One that you can go and watch their exclusive content that they've created. So we did it through them, so they get that exclusivity for the first little bit, and then we'll have a wide release after that.
Awesome. Okay, well, we'll close out with that. And thanks again, Nelson. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. And
thanks, everybody. Thanks,
we have
Norm.
another live stream starting Tuesday. Alex Kinsella will be here talking about content marketing and whether all ideas are great ideas or not. Alex is a very engaging guest, and he has a lot of experience. So we're looking forward to having Alex on. That's Tuesday at 11 o'clock. And so thanks, everybody. And we'll just cut over to the video.
While my mom was making dinner, I was up there with her, like cutting onions and chopping celery.
We were living paycheck to paycheck. There was no plan B.
When you're tasting coffee, take a good scoop with your spoon.
I think I just like when I'm pushed outside my limits.